High above the valleys of Switzerland, where mist clings to jagged peaks and silence rules the alpine air, lie communities hidden from the world's gaze. Here, stone homes anchor themselves against the slopes, and traditions echo through centuries of wind and snow. These mountains, both harsh and sheltering, have shaped lives as enduring as the granite cliffs themselves. In these secluded realms, history is not written in books, but carved into ridges, forests, and forgotten passes. This is the story of Switzerland's hidden mountain people, guardians of landscapes where time slows and the human spirit stands unbroken against the heights. High in the Swiss Alps, where the ridges of Valais and Graubünden cut into the sky, the Walser people carved their destiny from rock, timber, and snow. Born of medieval migrations, they carried their language and faith into valleys untouched by outside hands, founding villages where only silence and wind had reigned before. Their wooden houses rose against the slopes, dark timbers weathered by centuries, their patterns echoing a dialogue between man and mountain. In these settlements, survival was never granted freely. Winters pressed long and bitter, avalanches roared from the cliffs, and the soil gave only what could be wrestled from it. Yet the Walser endured, guided by a spirit that sought freedom in isolation. Their dialects, distinct and melodic, remained fragments of an older tongue, spoken across roofs crusted with frost and paths cut by snow. Conflict was carved into their existence as much as the beams of their homes. The mountains were both their fortress and their adversary. Frost and hunger tested every season, while distance from the valleys below left them cut off from trade and comfort. The Walser became masters of adaptation, building terraced fields on impossible inclines, weaving cattle trails through gorges, and raising churches whose spires pointed defiantly toward the heavens. They carried with them not just survival, but identity, a culture steeped in resilience, where every stone wall and timber beam spoke of endurance against nature's unrelenting hand. And yet, their story is not one of defeat, but of triumph. Across Valais and Graubünden, their villages still cling to the high ground, some so remote that only winding paths can reach them. From above, they appear like fragments of another age, frozen in time, cradled in snow and silence. Their heritage whispers in dialects still spoken by a few, in architecture that has resisted centuries of storms, and in landscapes where their presence lingers like the echo of a bell across the peaks. The Walser stand as guardians of a mountain legacy, people who sought the farthest reaches of the Alps, and in doing so, wrote their history into the heights themselves. Along the high valleys of Graubünden, where rivers twist through pine forests and glaciers crown the ridges, stand the villages of the Engadine Romansh. Here, houses of stone rise close together, their facades painted in soft colors and adorned with ancient patterns, doorways framed by arches that carry the weight of centuries. Within these walls lives a people whose tongue has outlasted empires, a language born of Latin roots, yet shaped by the silence of mountains and the passage of time. Romansh drifts through the narrow streets, a voice as old as the peaks themselves, carried in song, prayer, and story. Yet life in the Engadine was never gentle. The altitude cut harvests short. Winters closed roads with heavy snows, and survival demanded both skill and solidarity. Families carved their lives into the land, terracing fields where soil clung thinly to stone, raising cattle in alpine meadows, and keeping their houses as fortresses against the cold. Their language and customs became more than identity. They became shelter. To speak Romansh in a hidden valley was to draw a circle of belonging, to keep the outside world at a distance, and to bind the community together through ritual and memory. Conflict came not with armies, but with time itself. Traders and rulers passed through. New tongues arrived from the lowlands, and yet the Romansh voice endured. It endured because it was spoken by shepherds calling across the meadows, by families gathered before the hearth, by villagers who painted their walls not just with decoration, but with symbols of resilience. Against the encroaching tide of other languages, Romansh became both fragile and unyielding, a thread holding centuries together, even as the world around shifted. From above, the Engadine villages seem almost like painted boxes placed upon the slopes, their designs shining beneath the alpine sun. But within them lies a living story, where each carved beam and painted window carries whispers of endurance. The Romansh remain the guardians of a culture bound to stone and snow, their voice as rare and luminous as the light on the mountain peaks. Here, at the roof of Switzerland, language is not just spoken, it is lived, etched into walls, and carried on the wind, a testament to people who chose to endure in silence and beauty. Beneath towering cliffs and the thunder of falling water lies the Lauterbrunnen Valley, a hidden world carved deep into the Bernese Oberland. Here, between sheer stone walls and curtains of mist, farmers have dwelled for centuries, anchoring their homes and fields to narrow strips of land. The valley holds one of the most dramatic landscapes in all the Alps, where waterfalls plunge from impossible heights and meadows glow with alpine light. Yet within this grandeur, life was never easeful. To the farmers of Lauterbrunnen, beauty was inseparable from struggle, and survival demanded a pact with both stone and storm. Theirs was a life of limits. The cliffs pressed inward, leaving only slender ground for crops and cattle. Winters swept through with deep snows, sealing the valley from the outside world. Avalanches tumbled from the ridges, floods swelled from the falls, and still the people held their ground. They cut terraces into the slopes, built homes of timber and stone against the cliffs, and guided their herds into pastures perched above the valley floor. Each season tested them anew, yet their roots grew deeper, nourished by traditions as constant as the waterfalls that never ceased to roar. The conflict of their existence lay in the valley itself, both cradle and trap, its cliffs protected but also confined, its beauty dazzled but also isolated. Roads came late, and for centuries the farmers lived in near solitude, their world bounded by walls of rock and sound. Their endurance became legend. Men and women who could read the sky before storms, who knew each echo of the cliffs, who built a way of life where others saw only peril. From above, Lauterbrunnen appears as a narrow green thread stitched between walls of stone, waterfalls cascading like silver ribbons from the heavens. Within it, the legacy of its farmers endures, a people bound not by conquest or expansion, but by rootedness. Their fields, their herds, their steadfast homes testify to centuries of resilience, where human presence has become as much a part of the valley as the cliffs and falls themselves. In Lauterbrunnen, the farmers remain guardians of a hidden world, keepers of life beneath the thundering waters. High in the rolling green folds of northeastern Switzerland lies Appenzell, a land where mountains soften into meadows and herders have shaped their lives to the rhythm of the peaks. Here, Alpine pastures stretch wide beneath the sky, dotted with huts of timber where milk once warmed in copper cauldrons and cheese took form as a craft handed through generations. These herders lived not merely with the land, but through it, raising cattle upon the slopes, leading them to high summer pastures, and carrying the weight of traditions as enduring as the mountains themselves. The life of an Appenzell herder was both beauty and burden. The pastures gave lush grass in summer, yet winters were long and biting, pressing the people to preserve every measure of food and warmth. To turn milk into cheese was to capture the fleeting abundance of the season, to store sunlight and grass in a form that could outlast the snow. Around their labor grew culture, songs sung across the meadows, bells echoing as cattle climbed the paths, and garments stitched with patterns that told stories of belonging. These embroidered costumes, bright against the green hills, were not adornment alone, but symbols of identity, threads binding community, memory, and pride. Yet conflict lingered in the delicate balance of their world. The mountain pastures, though generous, could not be overused. Storms rolled suddenly across the ridges, and avalanches cut paths through the valleys. To live here was to negotiate constantly with nature's moods, shaping human custom to mountain law. Even their festivals, vivid with color and sound, were more than celebration. They were rituals of endurance, marking the triumph of survival through another season and the return of life to the high ground. From above, Appenzell's landscape appears as a tapestry of meadows stitched between hills, dotted with herds and villages that shine like fragments of another age. It is here that the herder's legacy endures, in the taste of alpine cheese matured in mountain air, in the echo of bells drifting across the slopes, in garments embroidered with a language older than words. Appenzell is not only a land of pastures, but a living archive of resilience, where people and mountain remain bound together in harmony and struggle, beauty and survival. Between the towering ridges of the Bernese Alps runs the Simmental Valley, a place where green meadows stretch long beneath the shadow of snow-capped peaks. Here, for centuries, shepherds have led their herds through the turning of the seasons, carving a way of life shaped by migration, ritual, and mountain lore. Their chalets, built from heavy timber, darkened by time, stand as anchors in the valley, homes that withstood storms and winters, while herds passed each year along ancient trails. From these wooden refuges, the sound of bells once rose like a song through the air, marking the rhythm of movement across the land. To the Simmental shepherds, life was measured not by clocks, but by journeys. Each spring, when the snow loosened its grip, families and cattle climbed toward alpine pastures where grass grew rich and strong. There, on high meadows beneath the sky, milk flowed into vessels and cheese was pressed, carrying the flavor of herbs and mountain air. Summer was a season of labor, yet also of freedom, as herders lived close to the clouds, their world framed by peaks and silence. Autumn brought the descent, marked by rituals of bells and procession, when cattle were led home adorned with flowers, their return a celebration of survival. But this rhythm of life was never gentle. The mountains guarded their gifts with storms, avalanches, and hunger. Shepherds fought frost and flood, carving terraces, mending chalets, and listening to the thunder of peaks that could both protect and destroy. Isolation weighed heavily in the long winters, when snow closed the passes and herders endured on what they had stored. Conflict lived in this balance between bounty and threat, between migration and return. From the sky, the Simmental appears as a ribbon of green, stitched between white summits, its chalets scattered like dark gems upon the land. Within it lies a legacy older than memory, where bells still echo, wooden homes still breathe with the smoke of centuries, and the migration of cattle remains a story of endurance. The shepherds of Simmental are more than keepers of herds. They are guardians of a tradition where the mountain and its people move in step, bound together in ritual, survival, and song. High on the slopes of Valais, where glaciers shine like rivers of ice and the air thins with altitude, lie villages that seem carved from the mountain itself. These communities, perched upon ridges and valleys, built their lives in defiance of altitude and frost. Wooden chalets rise from stone foundations, their beams darkened by centuries of snow and sun, while granaries stand elevated on stilts of stone to guard precious harvests against rats and damp. Here, survival was measured in stores of grain, in herds sheltered against the storm, and in fires carried through winters that seemed without end. The villagers of Valais lived with the glaciers as neighbors, watching their shifting ice advance and retreat, a force both feared and revered. Farming at the edge of such immensity demanded courage. Fields clung to narrow terraces, vines traced the slopes where warmth lingered, and cattle grazed in high pastures that trembled under the shadow of ice. Winters locked the valleys in silence, cutting off paths and cloaking the chalets in snow that weighed heavy on their roofs. Against such trials, the people created rituals of light and endurance. Torch processions wound their way through the night, flames glowing against the darkness as symbols of hope and renewal, their fire a shield against the mountain's long shadow. Conflict was the constant dance between human will and nature's dominion. Avalanches thundered down the ridges, floods spilled from glacial melt, and frost bit deep into the soil. Yet the villagers did not yield. They adapted their homes to breathe with the seasons, raised granaries high to save what little the land gave, and passed down traditions that turned hardship into continuity. Each torch lit, each wall built, each field sown became an act of defiance, a promise that life could endure even at the edge of the impossible. From above, the Valais villages glimmer like embers set against snow and stone. Wooden roofs cluster tightly, granaries stand like sentinels, and the vast glaciers loom beyond, white and endless. In this meeting of fire and ice, the people of Valais wrote their story, one of endurance, ritual, and quiet triumph. They remain the keepers of a fragile balance, mountain villages whose spirit has endured as steadfastly as the peaks that guard them. Across the vast alpine expanses of Graubünden, where valleys stretch into silence and ridges guard the horizon, herders have moved with the rhythm of the seasons for centuries. These people were never bound to one place alone, but followed a path shaped by the mountains themselves. In spring, as the last snow retreated, they led their cattle upward, climbing to meadows alive with wildflowers and fresh grass. Summer unfolded in the high pastures, where huts of timber stood as temporary shelters, smoke curling into the sky, and the sound of bells drifted across the slopes. Life there was raw and immediate, marked by labor, vigilance, and a closeness to the clouds. This migration was not choice alone, but necessity. The winters of Graubünden struck with force, burying the upper meadows in snow and silence. At the first signs of frost, herders gathered their animals and descended to the safety of the valleys, driving their herds along winding paths, bells clanging like echoes through the cliffs. Each descent was a procession of survival, marking the end of abundance and the beginning of endurance. To remain above would mean death, for no hut, no herd, no store of grain could outlast the mountain's frozen grip. Conflict arose from this endless cycle. The herders lived between two worlds, never fully settled, never wholly free. The mountain demanded movement, and to resist was to perish. Storms fell without warning. Avalanches roared across trails, and wolves prowled the forests in lean years. Yet, within these dangers, the herders forged identity. They became masters of adaptation, balancing their lives on the thin line between summer's wealth and winter's scarcity. From the air, the landscapes of Graubünden reveal this ancient rhythm. Summer pastures lie open and green, marked with the dark shapes of huts and the glitter of streams, while the valleys below hold the clustered villages that awaited winter's return. It is a world shaped by passage, where human lives trace the arc of migration, like the turning of the seasons themselves. The herders of Graubünden remain the quiet custodians of this tradition, people who followed the breath of the mountains and carved their survival from the necessity of movement. Deep within the folds of Graubünden lies the Walser of Valais, a land where steep mountains guard a chain of hidden villages and where silence rests heavy upon stone. Here, in settlements clustered around slender churches of pale rock, the people carved a life of endurance, binding themselves to the land and to a language as fragile and ancient as the peaks themselves. Romansh drifts through these narrow streets, spoken in prayer beneath painted arches, whispered in fields covered by snow, and carried from one generation to the next as though each word were a torch passed against the wind. The valley offered beauty, but beauty alone never sustained. Winters came long and harsh, cloaking the ground in white and sealing paths with ice. Food grew scarce, herds struggled, and avalanches thundered down from ridges that seemed too steep to hold. Against such odds, the Walser people turned to ritual, lighting fires and carrying torches through the night to push back the cold, calling upon traditions older than memory. These acts were not mere ceremony, but lifelines, affirmations of belonging and survival when the darkness threatened to overwhelm. Their stone churches, stark against the snow, became more than places of worship. They were the heart of endurance, shelters for faith and for the spirit of community. Yet conflict was constant, fought not against invading armies, but against silence and erasure. The valley's isolation, once a shield, also carried the danger of being forgotten. The Romansh language, shaped by centuries in the mountains, faced the slow pressure of stronger tongues from beyond the ridges. Still, the people resisted. They spoke their words in the fields, carved them into song, and taught them to children as a defense against time itself. Every phrase was an act of defiance, every verse a refusal to let their story be lost to the world. Seen from the sky, the Walser Valley unfolds as a ribbon of clustered villages, stone towers rising like watchmen above roofs heavy with snow. In this place, language and ritual still burn quietly, like embers against the dark. The people of Walser endure not only as farmers and herders, but as guardians of memory, keepers of a voice that has survived storms, silence, and centuries. Their legacy remains written into the valley itself, where each word spoken in Romansh is as enduring as the mountains that protect them. Between the soaring cliffs and narrow passes of eastern Switzerland lies the land of Glarus. where villages cling like nests to steep slopes, and wooden houses rise against a backdrop of stone. Here, life has always been carved from difficulty. Paths wind sharply upward, hewn into the rock, connecting scattered settlements that seem suspended between valley floor and sky. The people who lived here were bound to the mountain's will, shaping homes from timber, fields from terraces, and survival from landscapes that allowed little softness. Theirs was a life hemmed in by grandeur. The cliffs that protected them also confined them, casting shadows long across the villages and pressing the land into narrow spaces for herds and crops. To walk these paths was to measure each step carefully, for storms swept quickly across the ridges and rock slides thundered without warning. Yet the villagers endured, their wooden houses standing as testaments to a craft refined over centuries, darkened by rain, braced against wind, built to last as long as memory itself. Conflict dwelt in every season. Winters buried the paths, isolating families for weeks at a time, while summer's short harvest had to sustain them through the cold. The land offered beauty, yet beauty came entwined with peril, demanding strength and foresight at every turn. Still, the people of Glarus made their lives here, guiding cattle to precarious pastures, binding together in close-knit communities, and building their identity on the very edge of endurance. Each terrace dug, each beam raised, each path carved into the cliffs was a triumph over silence and stone. From above, the Glarus Alps appear as a dramatic stage of vertical walls, narrow valleys, and scattered wooden roofs glowing beneath the sun. The villages seem impossibly placed, clinging to places where no settlement should survive. And yet they do, carrying forward a history of resilience as steadfast as the cliffs themselves. The Glarus villagers remain guardians of this high world, a people who chose to root themselves where others would only pass through, leaving behind a legacy of survival that is etched into every winding path and weathered house. In the heart of central Switzerland lies the Uri Valley, a land where mountains rise like fortresses and lakes mirror their towering walls. Here, some of the oldest alpine communities made their home, binding their lives to paths that wound through gorges and across ridges. Rope bridges once swayed above torrents, linking villages separated by chasms of water and stone. Along the shores of the lake, wooden houses clustered close, their reflections trembling in the waves, while alpine trails stretched upward into silence. Uri was not merely a valley, it was a gateway, a passage through the heart of the Alps, where people forged endurance from both isolation and connection. Life in Uri was shaped by its position between the river and the peaks. The paths demanded courage, each journey a test of balance against wind and rushing water. Winters sealed the high ground in snow, while spring thaw sent torrents crashing through the gorges, carrying boulders and trees in their flood. Yet the people endured, crafting traditions that tied them to the land and the lake. Fishing sustained them as much as farming, while their homes stood as anchors against storms that swept across the valley. Conflict lay in the constant negotiation with the elements. The bridges that bound the valley could as easily break as hold, and every journey carried risk. Yet these fragile connections also created resilience. Communities gathered in festivals by the lakeside, their rituals a reminder that togetherness was the answer to the mountain's severity. Each season demanded sacrifice, yet each season also gave meaning. Every harvest stored, every bridge rebuilt, every trail cleared was part of a larger story of endurance.